let me go ahead and get started. And then I have, if my staff behind me, I have 3 like segments that I want to cover. So just time-wise, if you can give me a heads up if I'm like taking too long on one. So what does the tool do? Basically, I opened up the toolbox here, and you can get to that toolbox either through the old taskbar, open it up as a toolbox, or you have up in the Extraction tab, you have the template tools. And there's a variety of them. You have by direction, by path, and cross-section. And these are going to be the main ones that I talk about here on out. And then we have this preview option, which shows you how well it fits. And then just when you build in your templates, you're going to use these breakpoints. Okay, so just to give you a heads up on, for those users who are not familiar with the tool, essentially you just select one of these templates that you have built, and you have a scenario where you have a long-running, feature that's basically repeatable, and you just go and define the direction. Oops, click too fast there. Let's see if I got the direction down. So it's close enough, but you can see that it drops 2 break lines, and the idea is it runs down in the direction that you give it every 5 units. It's looking at a search window. You could flip the template around and work on the other side if you want, so you can actually see the red and the green bar, and then you just kind of give it a direction and it goes. So this is the by direction option, and for the majority of this case, I'm going to stick with this tool and kind of explain it. Notice how I wasn't concerned with where it was stopping or starting. Well, where it was starting, but not necessarily stopping. We got those 4 resulting break lines from my template running it twice. So let's kind of break this down a little bit more. The first thing you need to do is design this template. So let's talk about the workflow here. So we just saw kind of a brief rundown on how to run it. So I'm going to take a cross section. This is just some flat line. You can take a horizontal, or you could take a cross section by points if you want to, just perpendicular cross section. And the idea is you want a nice, thin slice. Maybe the slice thickness is going to be matching your sample size and things like that. So the idea is we want to trace our profile out. You could use lines. You could use shapes. I'll kind of emphasize the shape portion. It has to be a shape if you use these little envelope pieces, or let's call them like buffer zones or something like that. But I do have a line running in the background, and if those of you who have been familiar with this tool for quite some time, this was the original idea, and then now we added these shape features, which kind of accounts for any fluctuation, either in the point cloud, plus and minuses, or just kind of the shape itself of the barrier. It's going to change a little bit over time. And the idea on tracing this out, so let me just go to a blank area here, is we'll just trace out a line. I'll make sure it's all on all zeroed out. The weight does matter. I'll touch upon that in a little bit, but here we go, just a simple trace. Okay, and I think I'm going to elaborate more on how you should properly build these things on the curbing, because the barrier is kind of straightforward. There's not a whole lot that can throw you off here. And then for shapes, you could do something as simple as like placing a block. So let's we'll do a rotated block, and we'll just go along the face here and just account for that fuzziness. Okay, same thing on the bottom. We'll do a block. Okay, your lines and your shapes don't even technically have to line up, but if you want to be neat about this, you could draw your blocks first and then connect the lines throughout. You can even put a block on the top. Okay, basically you're just trying to lock this thing in so it has a proper fit. Okay, so how do we test this thing? Well, I want to make sure that before I save this thing as a cell, I want to make sure it runs. So what we could do is we can select our items that we want to include on our template. This is the template. So we haven't even talked about break lines yet or anything like that. But this is the backbone of the tool here. And we're going to open up the little testing feature. And this gives us the ability to kind of test it on one segment. So right now we're just in preview mode. You can actually move these elements if you want. Right now I just want to preview it. You got your search area. So basically this would be kind of like your sample size. Okay, so you have like a data thickness and then your search area. I'm assuming is going to be left and right for this cross section based off of our template. And then we're not really going to allow for rotation in this case because it's just a barrier, it's not rotating. So let me go ahead and test this. And if I zoom in, you can see my original line, and then you can see the actual preview that is fitting. So what I'm looking for here is subtle movement. I'm not, if you end up getting a large shift or it jumps up somewhere, then we need to rethink how to build this. So if let's say this whole thing is like sliding up and down, and I want to constrain it more a little bit vertically, we can maybe put some emphasis on the top part here and give it some weight. All right, this just gives it a little bit more priority. All right, there's also a void box that we can add. So the concept behind that is you have to pick a line style of 5, and then basically you can draw in a void box. And let's also make that a default 0 for now. You always want to start off small. Don't go too large up front. So this would be kind of like a void box. Again, this is a shape, but this just helps keep this in check during the fitting process. As you imagine, as this thing is moving around, go ahead and just move it manually, it's going to want to fit to these things. But if it's, landing in an area like this, it's not going to be providing a good fit. And this void box is kind of like a penalty zone where if you're landing in a case like this, it's not going to want to fit. It may drift off, come back, and it fits better in this location because there's no data. So just rule of thumb, this should be a voided area. So don't put it on the outside of your shape because you might have like vegetation or something along those lines. Okay, so let's go into some keynotes that I have here. So yeah, void is a line style of 5. Envelopes need to be shapes. Lines are okay too. All right, so we have lines. And then we're going to talk about the breakpoints now. So let me go back to this cross section. All right, so our breakpoints, these little crosshair things, we have red ones and green ones, and the red ones are locked, and the green ones are adjustable. And when we're talking adjustable, it's basically going to post-adjust once this template fits. Where the red ones are going to be locked in place based off of the template. Okay, so if the template in this case fits exactly like this, the red point or the red crosshair is going to be stuck exactly with this template. However, with the green point, it will be horizontally locked with the template, but it can vertically adjust afterwards based off of the draping routine that we give it. So let's take a look at how to apply these. Go back to this cross section here and I'll kind of hide the preview. So once we know this thing is good, then we can start adding breakpoints. I think the first step is just building the template itself. So let's add the breakpoints in. I would recommend having these things defined up front. I will mention later when you're working with smart cells, it's important to have individual colors. But let's go ahead and get started. So I have a barrier top option. Let's go ahead and just make this one we'll keep it locked. So we're not going to drape to the data afterwards. Okay, but maybe for the bottom corner here, I want to go ahead and drape this one. So I'm going to, pick level bottom. I'm going to activate the draping, and you're going to see this blue box pop up. Now, once we place the point, you're not going to be able to see this blue box. So just be careful during this procedure. So you want to make your adjustments before you drop it. So if you do want to push this a little bit further over, you can do so by plugging in the value and then just kind of moving your cursor back into the view. All right, so again, this is a post routine. Just to kind of give you an idea on what these do, this is basically kind of the width of the sample box. Okay, I know it says length, but think of it as a width. And then you have upper and lower limits. That's basically how high and low from this point it's going to search. Okay, so if you place it here, you want it to go low enough to get to this data. So maybe we would drop this thing down to like half a foot or something like that. Okay. All right, so now that it's set, I can then place the point and we're good to go. Okay. If you're not sure what it was, you can always hover over the point. It tells you this is a barrier bottom, and there's some numbers in there. They're going to be the same order every single time, but I have 0.5, 0.5, 0.25, and then our offset involved. So those are basically just the sample sizes and the limits and whatnot. All right, so the last step you would conduct is just defining an origin. So we have to, because we're going to be saving this thing as a cell, we're going to do define origin. And I usually like to place it somewhere. So if you're looking to the left and then the right, I like to place it somewhere in the middle of those two left and rights, just because when you use the tools, we'll see this later on, the middle of your sample box is going to be that location. Okay. All right, so once that's all set up, my ACS is still lined up with my plane here. I can then add it to my cell library, cells. You'll select your object, make sure you don't select anything else outside of it, and then you can right click, new, and then just name it whatever you want. Okay. Now I already have cells built here. You can see I have kind of a variety of them. Some with the void, some without. You may not always have to use the void, but it's beneficial if you do have some data internal or if it's supposed to be a void. Actually, if you have too much data in the middle, you might want to avoid using a void because I noticed some of these have larger gaps with data in between. This was the old school version where I just have a shape running down the entire side. And then you could also think about just doing the top. You could do the top and the bottom separately if you want to. So this is just like a top corner. You could apply this to a wall and whatnot, and we'll see the guardrail later. Okay, so now that's saved in there. Let me just remove it so it doesn't trip us up here during the selection process. But so we'll activate the tool one more time. So this is by direction. We're going to pick our cell. You can just sort through this. I'm just going to go with the first available one. And we're going to do define direction. Again, one more time, we're going to keep track of the red and green indicators for orientation. If not, you flip it. Okay, but I'm going the right direction here. And the idea is I know that my barrier starts at the beginning of maybe my tile, and I know it ends, and there's really nothing in between. It's a long run, so I can basically allow this to do all the legwork for me. All right. Running the tool, let's talk about some basic settings. Search window, that's a pretty simple one. When you go to define the direction, that's the size of the rectangle that we see here. So we got a width and a length in the direction of travel. How often do you want to search and place these handles? Let's look at our options here. You have a linear, polynomial, and then multi. So basically, if you're on a highway or most road corridors, you could just stick with linear. But if you're on kind of like a curvy mountainous road, you can maybe think about switching to polynomial. I found a lot of the linear extrapolation to be perfectly fine for most roads. And then if we're involving the origin point, we can include that, or sync our view, load data dynamically, things like that. Again, we're not really adding a rotation here unless we have it. And then if we have a really steep grade, we want to kind of account for that. Most likely everything's going to be below 10%. And then we'll look at the scores. I'll show you how to check this stuff. Okay, so I want to now check this line work. What's the best way to do it? So one, we can obviously show scores if we wanted to. So that's the scoring mechanism that we talked about earlier. You know, blue's great, red's poor, not necessarily meaning it's a bad result, but it's, you know, possibly a bad fit, or the barrier shape itself has changed significantly from our template. Maybe it's just, we'll call it a location to investigate. You know, and before you actually click on it, I kind of want to talk about like how you can kind of skip through this stuff fairly quickly. So you select a line, and I'm going to use the cross-section along element option here. Okay, if you're not familiar with running this tool, it's fairly beneficial for checking line work, but I'm going to go to the vertices only, and I'm not skipping anywhere in between. I just want to go to the vertices, so I'm plugging in a 0 here. Okay, you click next, and it basically takes you right to that handle. And if you've clicked this once at least, then you can just start hitting enter, and then just kind of rip through each handle individually to kind of check this. If you wanted to check 2 points or 2 lines at the same time, you'll just do like a selection set here. So you select this line first, and then you hold control and select this one. You'll still get those handles. And then again, you just kind of rip through, and we'll zoom out a little bit to kind of see both the bottom and the top here. You can do them at the same time. So if I come in here and do show scores, and just, you know, as long as I've continued on with this tool, I could just continue to jump around. Now I might not see the handles, but I can see at least the ACS, and I got a red point. I can see my line up here. I'm not overly concerned. It's just the shape has slightly changed. All right, so that's how you can quickly kind of go through and check the results. I'll show you later on how we can kind of move some stuff around if you see like an error or flag it or something like that. But let's move on to the guardrail real quick, just to kind of give you an idea of applying a different template in a different scenario. So actually, let me find it first. All right, so let's take a cross section here, and all right, so there's my template that I built. It may be a little difficult to see the points here. Let me bump them up. All right, so I just focused on what is going to be the most present part of this guardrail. So I chose the top here and this little kink in the side. And again, you know, as long as you just have shapes, they could be separate shapes, multiple shapes, and then lines that don't actually have to be connected. Just the emphasis is the shape portion, because I see a lot of people drawing lines and they don't close them, or they modify them later on and it doesn't end up being a shape. If you have to convert things to a shape, just create complex shape. And you can do it manually, simplified geometry to keep things simple. All right, so that's another idea. I just have a point at the top here, and I'll go to the beginning of our line, choose our guardrail, define our direction. And in this case, I'd probably drop down the sample width to kind of keep it on track, and we'll get a direction. Select my line, open up that cross-section tool, and then I can kind of skip through and hit enter. Now, if you're doing multiple lines, let's say I want to go back to the barrier and I want to use this tool, you know, if I were to select it and hit the arrow, it's just going to keep going back to whatever it had previously set. So just know that with this line selected, refresh the tool, and you'll then be able to jump on to that new line. All right, I think I'm done with this segment. Let's carry on to the curbing portion, because I just realized that I only have 30 minutes with you guys, and this one's probably going to take up all of our time. And I like this project because because it has kind of like everything in it, especially this island feature, and I'm going to be kind of juggling some tools here. So discussion on the workflow, I'm going to keep this brief just to kind of save some time. Where's my template here? Hope I didn't kill it. Oh, there it is. All right, so here's my template. I'll do cross-section by points this time, and I'll make sure I snap in here. That's enable AccuSnap, cut a cross-section, and then there's my shape. Let me explain a little bit more about this because we're going to be involving smart cells, and I'm going to repeat myself, probably at least twice here. So keynotes for smart cells is, we want our break points to have their own individual colors. Now, I know they're all green right here, but the resulting lines we want to be on their own colors. So I have flow line, I have top of curb, and I have back of curb. Don't look at the level, look at the cell metadata behind it. But I know all those levels have their own colors. If they're not, change it in your level manager, do all that stuff up front. And I'll give you an example of a smart cell later on. We need at least 3 template points, okay? If we're going to be tying into curb work with pedestrian ramps. And then maybe the color portion, I'll just kind of mention one thing here. You have like an RGB color, and then you have like index color. So this would be like an RGB color, and this would be like an index color. Make sure you stay consistent on that as well, because I noticed, sometimes when you place like a red point or something like that, well, this color is an RGB color, unfortunately. So I can't just like place these things at the ends to tie my ramps into. Okay, so another point, template points need to match the anchor points. I'll give you a visual on that, and then we'll look at some other tools to help adjust our line work. I always emphasize when building the template, we just saw it on the barrier, but anything that stands out from the surrounding area, this is fairly flat. This is flat as well, so I don't want to incorporate too much flatness in my cell. So I have this little curved bit here, and then the main go-to face is this piece, and that's kind of a general rule of thumb. And then I've introduced the void here because it is going to help me out in a different area, which we'll see later. But let's go ahead and get started. So now I'm going to run the tools. Ooh, actually, before I jump ahead here. So during the building process, if you want a specific offset and you want the top and back to go to the same location, you want the same elevations out of them, well, you can kind of, you can have this happen by just giving them the same offset. So I'm plugging in a quarter unit here, okay? And then we're gonna go a quarter in this direction, all right? But you'll have kind of like an idea of what I'm talking about. So when we introduce the breakpoints, let's do an offset of a quarter, and we'll do like a 1/10 in this case. Oops. All right, so if I introduce a template point here, notice the sample is going to fall in the same spot if I decide to do the same for the top of curve. Okay, so we're just going to kind of manage that. Now, technically, these can be at floating up here because they're going to redrape anyways, but just get them close, because if your if your depth is not this, in this case, it's very deep here, but if it's not, then it won't catch that data. Okay, that was just kind of a quick note on that. And I know this is a lot of information, but those are kind of like little crucial keynotes there. All right, let's look into now running the tool. So we're going to go around the island first, and we're going to juggle a few tools. A couple of other tools that I'm going to juggle is this fit arc. and we're going to do the corner tool. So let me open this toolbox up just to kind of have it available for us. And now I'm going to be talking about the by path option and the cross section or by cross section. Notice how these aren't long running straightaways. This is a really complicated scene. We got turns and pedestrian ramps, maybe drop inlets, an island. So this is a good example to go through. So I'll do cross section by path. I'll pick my cell. And if you're doing, you can actually juggle back and forth. Sometimes you'll have edge of pavement, sometimes you won't. But you'll just have to keep track of that too. But let's say we pick our cell, and let's go ahead and increase our width here. Okay, so that looks good. And then I'll do a spline option because this is kind of curving up, and I'm not going to stop at vertices. I'll explain that in a little bit. All right, so let's define our path. And we'll just kind of go along here and just trace out our path here. It's going to go at a 5-unit interval. And I'm going to make sure to stop just short. I'm right-clicking to stop short. We don't want to try and get as close as we can. It's just better to get close and stay on the outside of our tangent because we'll see later on that we're going to clean that up. And I'll define the path on this one. Okay, we'll just do a short run, and then we'll do the one on this side. So once I'm done running the by path option, we're going to then switch to the cross-section method. So they're almost identical. Sometimes I get tripped up, but just kind of keep them a little bit separate from each other and just always look at what you're grabbing here. But we're going to use the same template. I'm going to define my cross-section, and I like this because it pushes it out into view 2, and I can kind of control the points if I need to. And again, we're going to keep track of that green and red option here. So we might have to flip that, or you flip the direction of the cross-section. Okay, so there's our points. If you have to adjust those points, you can just either manually move them with a 3-2 keyboard shortcut, or you could do the quick adjust, which I'll show later on, but these looks fine to me. And we're going to go to each one of those corners and drop those points. Okay. Once everything is kind of dropped in there, let me move these aside. There we go. All right, and then we're going to use, let's say we stick with the corner first. We're going to join our corner. Okay, let's look at our sides here for the arc. So we'll do a fit arc because we have lines on both sides and points in the middle. Okay, and notice how I don't have points on the end of these. All right, some of these tools have the ability to drop those points. Right now, I'm not creating endpoints. Okay, if you did have those endpoints there and you accidentally grabbed them, the tool might not run. So just make sure you just have lines and points. And you kind of get the idea here of how to kind of run this. Now, we obviously still want to check our line work. I'm just kind of running through this fairly quickly. And this is just kind of an island example. I wanted to get a little bit more complicated with involving like the ramp and kind of juggling these tools at the same time. So we process the island. Obviously, we still want to check our lines. We want to implement like any quick adjust if we need to quickly adjust something. So let's say we weren't really happy with the horizontal placement of this. You could just do quick adjust. So I long right clicked or right click and hold. You get this circle. I'm not doing auto snap right now. And then you just kind of, you can move this around like so. And this is just going to horizontally move it around for us. You can also do this in cross-section view 2 as well. Just be careful with what is in that cross-section. If you have multiple handles, you don't want that. You want to stick with one set of handles per movement. And then let's go ahead and move on to the next scene. So this is going to be a little bit more complicated, and I'll talk a little bit about the tool settings here, but I'm still going to use the bypass option. And we're going to go ahead and pick our cell. Let's see, stick with, we'll actually let's include the edge of pavement in this case. I'm going to go to a linear bit now because this isn't really curving. It's, kind of like straight bits. And if you have trouble kind of visualizing this, you can always kind of switch to like a colored contours, to help maybe the face of the curve kind of pop a little bit. It'll even kind of warn you if you have like a, something like a ramp going in here, because you'll have like a sharp contrast versus like a subtle one. But this is going to be my complex zone, and then this is going to be my smart cell zone, and I'll show you how to kind of integrate these two. All right, let's start at the beginning. And we saw the corner tool before, but in this case, if I want to do a shallow corner or, not a sharp corner, we can actually have it stop and process at a particular vertice that I give it. We can also have it create endpoints. I'll show you how to kind of mimic this with another tool, but we'll define our path. Again, make sure the orientation is correct. I'm just going to go from one turn to the next. Okay, so I see the turn in here. In this case, I could either go with an arc in this case, or I could just do like a quick, 2 points to represent that turn. And then you also, I'm going to end it around this ramp. Now, there's a couple of ways to do this. You can fall short and tie those points in later on with the cross-section tool. Maybe I'll just mix it up that direction. I haven't fully decided, but we'll have it fall right there. Okay, and if I do want to adjust these back, or I want the ability to kind of like see these points in action, it might be better off to do the cross-section template at cross-section, especially if I can see in top view where I need to place those points. Let's come back to this in a second. All right, so there's our lines. Again, I would want to go through and quickly check these with our cross-section tool. So you dart through and make sure all those are correct. Okay, again, if you wanted to add in more of those handles there, you would do so. Now, this is just a generic template that I set up, and I'm mainly focusing on the middle portion of this top curb, and I'm maintaining the same offset for my top and back. Again, curbs are going to fluctuate a little bit here and there, but the idea is to try and have a kind of standard template to kind of run with and have it do the best fitting for us. Even though, I can imagine moving over the flow line just a little bit over here, moving the back of curb just a little bit over here. It's going to be preference. And maybe someday we'll have a horizontal adjust, but for now it's just all vertical, and this is the idea. Okay. All right, so once that's checked, let me go into this ramp here. So like I said earlier, like if we didn't place these directly on this, we can kind of move them back. And what I would do is fall short, okay, because I can always pick these up and snap them into these known locations. So we'll do a cross-section routine here. Okay, we'll include the edge of pavement here, since I have an edge of pavement going on, and we'll define our cross-section. Make sure that's pointing the right way, and then that way I kind of get a cross-section view to go with this, and I can massage any points that need adjusting. Okay, so if I wanted to move these just a little bit, we can move them, a little bit further up. I can maybe be a little bit more picky about the back of curb and move that over. I can also kind of thin out my cross-section. Maybe I'm looking at too many points because this is kind of sloping down a little bit. So you'll notice that I'm going for the higher end of this because I know I am sloping down. So there's going to be a variety of ways to do this. Let's do the other side now, but I'm going to do it a little bit differently. So if we were to just use the by path option, you can enable this create points at endpoints option, which will drop those points for us. Let me pick the right cell here. Okay, so we'll just like process that little bit right there. And then you end up, in this case, flipping it. So we'll flip this one. Always keep track of the direction of our sample here. All right, but it does drop those points for us, which we'll see in a little bit how we tie in with the smart cell. So I have points on this side. Well, I can tuck these ones in. You know, you could do the quick adjust, and this time around you could do the auto snap. Make sure you don't grab everything at once, especially when they're like close together like this. I'd probably run with like maybe a smaller setup here, something like this, and maybe work with just pairs at a time. But this auto snap is going to kind of connect them in like so. And all we're doing is we're just picking up that line or that handle and snapping it in. So you'll notice that all those handles have been adjusted. So if you see the lines at the ends kind of slightly kinked to the side, don't worry, you can always fix them with these points in the quick adjust. If you didn't have the points and you wanted to add those, use the quick points option, and you just simply click over. It looks like the auto adjust, but we're just clicking in and adding those points. Okay, notice the colors are going to be our index colors. All right, so now I'm basically ready to go. So we select our, in this case, 8 points. I want to make sure I'm selecting 8 points with the little indicator down here. And then we can use our play smart cell so you can kind of see how this all ties in. Play smart cell, and then you'll get your visual here, and obviously we'll want the data at this point, but I have 2 options here, one with the edge of payment. We'll double click on that to place our cell, and because I've QA/QC these points and I placed them in and I know they're good, well, I know my cell is going to tie in exactly to those points, so I don't have to worry too much about those. And then I have all my other points as drag points, which you can see doesn't fit perfectly, but you can always massage them into place. And just kind of a quick preview on how that works. You can take these points and adjust them, and it basically pulls the line work with you. Now, we're not going to go too into depth on this, but I'm going to kind of move on from this and just explain a couple of key points. So I have an example over here before I even save the cell. When you're creating a smart cell, when you're creating a curb, call it curb template or template by extraction, these are our templates. Well, you have anchor points for the cells. We just want to make sure those colors match. And if I select both of these, we have our single color. I know it says by level, but that's pretty much what's I think active up here. But we don't want to see like a RGB blue and an index blue. And we also don't want to see like an orange and a blue situation. These all have to be kind of synced together. And then you have this synced on one side and these synced on the other. And again, we need 3 points at least for the smart cells. So we want to include 3 points in our templates. Even if we don't need a 3rd point, if you're dealing with smart cells, just have a temporary point that you'll delete. Maybe let's say you don't need the top of curve. You'll just eventually delete that, but you'll include it so that you can snap those smart cells in. We need it for the fitting routine when we do a best fit on the smart cell here. All right, so I have a couple of minutes left, and we're going to go into the more difficult segment here. So let's talk about that. And we're going to be juggling a couple of tools. Again, if the majority of our work can be handled with these quicker tools, definitely take advantage of those. However, if you notice a situation where they're not running or you're having difficulty, either contact us or maybe rethink the template building process or just try to figure out what's going on. So I'm just going to kind of let it run. And there's a couple of things that are going to happen over here. I already know what's going to happen, but we're going to do by path here. And let's mix it up. Let's just do, let's do a spline. Maybe I approach this, not knowing that anything's going to happen. Well, I'll just define my path. We're going to go with a nice large sample because it's been working for us, here on out. And we're just going to give it a nice little sweep through here. Obviously, we don't have any hard turns to deal with, so I don't technically need that, process at vertices. It's still going to run for us, and I obviously forgot to flip the template, so let me flip it around again. I would say maybe that's the first thing you look at when you do this stuff, but I'm trying to do a demo here and talk at the same time, so it's kind of hard sometimes. All right, so let's do that one more time. And then just kind of see what it does for us. All right, so by the way, I'm right-clicking at the end of all these, in case you're curious to know. All right, so it looks like it kind of worked. It fumbled around in this area. I'm not terribly surprised, but it seems like it worked over here okay. And maybe if you just have like one or two, it might not be as obvious, but you'll be able to find out right away with ripping through on the cross-section tool that I was talking to you earlier. So some of them are looking good. Some of them are just kind of beat up. Now, I would say, if you start off at the beginning and you notice that a couple of these are, the majority of these are okay, what I, started doing is I started dropping like flag points. So maybe I'll call this one like flagged area. And I'll just kind of drop a point down there just to indicate that I have to come back to this. And, I'm looking for another flag point that, so this area is looking pretty good. I want to go back to the last available location. Okay, so this is up right here. That's fine. I'm going to put a flag point right there. This is just kind of give you an idea of how to kind of visualize, what you need to fix. I have a flag point over here. And I have a flag point there, so I know I had to kind of work on this segment, and I can technically just delete these lines. Or if it's just one location, let's talk about that one location. Oops, let me bring the data back up here. If it's just one location, let's say it's this location, we just need to adjust them to the side. You'll do the quick adjust. If you're doing this in a cross-section view, I highly advise you to turn the auto snap off because you are going to be probably increasing your window size here, and you could potentially have handles in the foreground and background that are not as obvious. And then we'll just kind of move this over to fit for us there. And then if we wanted to drop these down, again, activate the tool one more time, and then just pull those down a little bit. Okay, so that's what you would do in a side view. The traditional method is dropping points, but if they're all broken and beat up like this, I would recommend just kind of breaking this up. So we'll just go ahead and break our lines at the flag points, and I'll break these ones actually here because I corrected these ones. And maybe I would switch over to something a little bit. So I would maybe leave this for later on to come back to. And then I'll go back to the by path option. And we'll select our cell that we want to work with. Maybe I won't work with such a large sample size. And maybe instead of going to the spline, I'll do linear. And maybe I will definitely force to specific locations that I know aren't going to be thrown off. So I don't want to place something in the middle of this. And then the idea is I can always pick these up and tie them into the next location. So just leave small gaps. There's my sample size. I don't probably want to include the back of curb because actually we'll see that in a little bit. So let me define my path and I'll try to keep it, on the face of that curb. We'll kind of skip this segment here and then just kind of give it a few key points. And I keep flipping it. Excuse me. Okay, you can also turn and make the search interval like 0 and just force it to the clicked locations. But if you know the spans that you're running right now are that large, if they're smaller than your search interval, you know you won't get an extra one in between. So let's see how this one has done. It looks like it got pushed out just a little bit. So let's see. So unfortunately, maybe I need to approach it a little bit differently. And since I am running out of time, I apologize because I just wanted to kind of show you how to approach things.
I think probably the template there is a little bit slightly different, and so so maybe we need to use a different template.
Yeah, it could be slightly different, but in this scene, this is a perfect example because we have a very faint amount of points on the front of this curve, where we have a lot on the back. It could be throwing it off, maybe the void's hitting it. There's a lot of things that could happen. But ultimately, if this is a small segment, I can always come back and use just my flow line in this case, and then just switch over to my brake line and fill these complicated areas. Don't try and rely on these tools everywhere. The idea is just to knock out a longer segment. So hopefully that kind of gives you an idea of how to approach it. At this case, I could switch over, hit start, and now I can use one of my templates, just calmly step through, and I'm guaranteed a good fit in this location.